We have with us for this afternoon's first session, Stan Swami. Stan Swami is a young tribal rights activist who likes to be called an indigenous people's rights defender.
If you are going to be there, then let us try the other one.
He is only 83 years old. He hails from the city of Tiruchirappalli in Tamil Nadu. He is a Jesuit. He has a variety of experiences, but basically has from the year 1975 till 1990 served as the director of the Indian Social Institute in Bangalore, where he trained thousands of activists. And I'm proud to tell you all that he is my mentor, somebody who has continued to show us the way in our difficult work of human rights. And we are proud that we have Stan with us today. Stan had decided not to continue in Tamil Nadu, a true missionary, decided that he will leave and join the Jamshedpur province of the Jesuits and started his early days in Singhbhum district of the then combined Bihar and Jharkhand together, the old Bihar. I remember him telling me a story as he was sitting with his school students and villagers under a mango tree, the mango tree story. A very moving story to me. And the story goes like this, that there was a father of a child standing there and pulling the branch so that the children could get more mangoes. And then Stan looked up, a young Stan those days, looked up and found a larger branch with better fruits on top and thought that that branch had not been seen by this old man. And therefore he pointed out to him and said, "Can I bring that branch down to you?" And that old man told him, "No, Stan, those are fruits for the birds of the air. Nature has given freely, and so we share freely." That was the starting point for Stan to reflect on the deep culture of the people with whom he was working, the Adivasis. Friends, to make the story short, Stan has had a long role to play. He went back from Bangalore once again to Bihar and then continued to work with what he called the Jharkhand Organization for Human Rights, Johar. And in 2000, November, Jharkhand was formed. He has a role to play in the movement of Adivasis for the building of the Jharkhand state, a tribal state. Thereafter, in 2001, he started what he calls Bagecha, the center where he works from, and now he is there since then. I will retain more details about Stan Swami till the end. He is therefore a trainer. He is therefore a teacher. And he has thousands and thousands of students all over the country. But every one of his students are people who dirty their hands in the lives of others. Lives of Dalits, lives of tribals, lives of fishermen, lives of homeless. That is his mission. A living, true Stan Swami. Over to you, Stan. And,
Yes.
and assisting Stan nearby is Solomon, another missionary, another Jesuit. These are the good Jesuits. I love these kind of Jesuits. But the problem is we have many of them. That's the problem. We have many good Jesuits like this. Stan, all set?
Just a minute.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly, perfectly.
Right. Speak.
Yes, I am ready to speak.
Go ahead, Stan. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Friends, here I am. Henry has introduced me to you, but I want to introduce a people to you, and they are the Adivasi people, and they are a special people. They are special for two reasons. One is, they are the aboriginals, Adivasi. They were here before any of us were around. They were the first citizens. And therefore, they have every right for every human right. Now, another reason is why I am saying they are special people is because they are the ones who have preserved nature, whereas the rest of society is up to destroying nature. Now we are realizing the after effects of these. But here are the Adivasis who have lived with nature, as part of nature, who have preserved nature. So, now what is it that makes me say that the Adivasis are a special people, apart from these two reasons? It is their community, the life in a community. There are some special characteristics that characterize them. First is equality and egalitarianism. They are an equal society. There is no one high, no one low. The second is there is a mutual cooperation in all that they do together. A third is a readiness to share without counting. For example, if you come to my place and I greet you, Johar, touching my heart, that means all that I have is yours. Sharing without counting. Another is a closeness to nature, to the extent that they are not just nature as nature, but nature as Mother Earth. So the tradition and belief among them is that you care for Mother Earth, and Mother Earth in her turn will care for you, will take care of you. That is the extent of closeness to nature. The next characteristic is the practice of consensus decision making. This is something that we don't see in our society. We are seeing majority opinion, majoritarianism. And we think this is democracy. We are used to this, what we call representative democracy. Whereas Adivasis have been practicing a participative democracy. That means everyone participates in the decision-making process. Finally, the primacy of community over family and individual. Our modern society, capitalist society, is all focused towards the individual, the rights of the individual. But an Adivasi society, community, gives primacy to the community. I have my identity to the extent that I am part of a community. So these are some of the cherishable characteristics of the Adivasi people. Next, please. Now, I need someone to support me in what I am saying. And it is not an ordinary person who will support. It is an extraordinary person, Maheshwata Devi. I'm sure most of you would know about her. She was a Bengali novelist who wrote many short novels, very endearing about the Adivasi people. So she once said if we have anything left of nature as of now, it is by Adivasis. And if we will have anything preserved of nature in future, it will also be by Adivasis. So see how valuable this observation is. Next, please. So that brings me to what I was saying, that the Adivasi people are not only close to nature, they are part of nature. Now, the sad thing is, these life of the people, the values that they have cherished, the tradition that they have enjoyed, they are all being weakened steadily by the so-called modern or modernity. We do have some laws, legislations, judicial judgments, but the sad fact is all these laws and judgments and policies are mere showpieces, and they are not really meant to be implemented. I will elaborate this as to how the laws that we have to protect the rights of Adivasis are only showpieces. Next, please. Now, where do we start? We start with the Supreme Court of India. It has made some very valuable observations in a landmark judgment in 2011, where in the case of a young Adivasi woman of the Bhil community in Madhya Pradesh, who was humiliated, paraded, and made to shame, all on an accused or alleged accusation. She appealed in the lower court, but she did not get justice. Finally, with the help of some human rights activists, she reached the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court made this observation, and I wish to quote this observation of the Supreme Court. The Adivasis, who are the descendants of the original inhabitants of India and are the most marginalized and are living in terrible poverty with high rate of illiteracy, disease, early mortality, etc. The mentality of our countrymen towards these tribals must change, and they must be given the respect that they deserve as the original inhabitants of India. They were deprived of lands and pushed into forests and hills, where they eke out a miserable existence of poverty, illiteracy, disease, etc. And now efforts are being made by some people to deprive them even of this forest and hill land where they are living, and make use of the forest produce on which they survive. So this is an observation coming from the Supreme Court of the country. Next, please. Now, as I mentioned before, there are laws, legislation, judicial judgments, which are meant to protect the constitutional and legal rights of Adivasis. I would like to explain each of them very briefly. First of all, the 5th schedule of the Indian Constitution, which stipulates that the Adivasi communities living in scheduled area they would not come under the rule of the elected government, but they have a government of their own, which will be supervised or guided by the governor of the state. There is a body called Tribal Advisory Council composed of 20 members. All of them should be Adivasis. So the governor places before them whatever policies, measures, legislations to be brought, and they give the governor the advice and the decision. Then it is the duty of the governor to convey this to the elected government. And the elected government is bound to carry this out. This is the law. This is the constitution. But unfortunately, it has been violated all along. No governor in all the scheduled area states have ever taken the pains to carry out this constitutional provision. Rather, elected governments have come to sway over the life of people. So this is the first violation of the rights of people, and it is not only of people but of the Indian Constitution itself. The second is a law passed in 1989, the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act. As the government realized that the atrocities over SCs and STs, Adivasis and Dalits was increasing, this act was passed to protect them. And it has some stringent provisions by which any non-tribal, if he or she, whether he's a government official or whoever it is, would defame or harm or damage physically, psychologically, morally, any of the Adivasi and Dalit, they would be punished severely. So here is a law, but the law has been laid to rest. Hardly any real punishment of the non-Adivasis, especially officers, and of the higher so-called castes and class have done against Adivasis have really been punished. Now of late, another development has taken place, namely if an Adivasi has filed a case under this act against a non-Adivasi officer, what he or she does is to file a counter case against the Adivasi and pull him or her to the court indefinitely, as such to exert a pressure to withdraw the case. So this is again an infringement of the law. So I come to the third point, the Panchayat Raj to scheduled areas, which is usually called PESA Act, Extension to Scheduled Areas Act. This is a significant act which came into being because in the 1990s, the Adivasi and Dalit MPs came together and said, with whatever so-called development is taking place, nothing is happening in our areas to Adivasis and Dalits. So they exerted pressure on the government. Government appointed a Bhuria committee, and the committee came forward with very encouraging provisions, but it was kind of diluted and passed into a law in 1996. But even this act, PESA Act, gives some significant powers to the Gram Sabha. Anything that happens to the village community cannot happen without the knowledge, consent, participation, of the Gram Sabha. So, in itself is quite a progressive measure, but again it is being violated. No one speaks of this law anymore. Next, please. Hello. There is another judgment, a very progressive judgment called Samta Judgment of 1997 of the Supreme Court. It was in reference to mining in scheduled area. So, in short, the Samta Judgment says that no mining can take place in scheduled area by anybody, not even the government, let alone private industrialists. Mining can only be done by Adivasis themselves, not individually, but through a cooperative, locally formed cooperative. And it is a bounden duty of the state government to provide the wherewithal by which that cooperative can function effectively, to provide the initial capital, to provide the technical input so that mining can be done. And then whatever is taken out, then the state or the private company has to buy it from them. So again, here is a judgment that has been given a decent burial. No one speaks of this anymore. Next, I come to another Supreme Court judgment. Owner of the land is also the owner of subsoil minerals. This was in reference to a case in Kerala, wherein a person found coal in her land, and she started to dig out the coal and take to the market. Immediately, the administration came down on her and said, anything that is mineral belongs to the state. You may not dig it or take it to the market. She appealed in the High Court. High Court declined to entertain her petition. Finally reached the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court came out with this very clear judgment. Owner of the land is also the owner of subsoil minerals. In short, in Hindi, we say, jiski zameen, uski khanij. So again, it's a law which goes counter to the belief that was held before all of us all these years, because where we were to think that anything that is mineral automatically belongs to the state. Again, this judgment is not having any impact with regard to the mining policies of either the central or state governments. They continue to allocate mines, go after auctioning the bidder and give over. But people have no participation and no share. Again, a serious violation of a law and a violation of the rights of people. Then I come to Forest Rights Act of 2006. This again, a government, when it passed this law, it said in its preamble that it is to correct a historic injustice done to the Adivasis and forest dwellers. So it admitted that a historic injustice has been done to them for people who lived in the forest. So Forest Department had all the power to do whatever it wanted. People were implicated in cases for which they were not at fault. Thousands of cases were piled up against people who they did not even know why they were being called to the court. So here is an act that came almost as a saving factor. So by this Forest Rights Act, every family living in the forest has a right for the land that they have traditionally cultivated for 3 generations or so. If they are Adivasis, even that condition does not exist. So at least a minimum of 2 hectares, that means about 5 acres of land, is due to every single family living in the forest. So, and people had to put in their petitions to claim ownership. To give you some information about this, in the whole country from 2006 to 2016, about 41 lakh petitions were submitted to the government claiming ownership of the land that they have been cultivating. 41 lakh. Of them, only 18 lakh applications were given the patta or the land ownership. 3 lakhs were held in suspense. The remaining 20 lakhs were rejected. That means half of the petitions that were submitted under the Forest Rights Act has been denied, has been rejected, without really assigning the reasons why. We can understand why it is happening, because the officers who sit to give the final decision, they are not Adivasis. They don't have any sympathy for Adivasis. So again, another act that has been violated. Finally, I come to Land Acquisition Act of 2013, which is a very significant act which replaced the Colonial Act of 1894. So this provides some significant favors. One is that rehabilitation is assured. A second is a fair compensation is assured. Third, a social impact assessment by an expert group is assured. So, but the government that came to power in 2014, it amended this act and made it so weak that anybody could do anything. So all these important provisions have been diluted. So here again, we are a very significant act again violated. Next, please. So, friends, these are the way by which the rights of Adivasis, they are not only Adivasi rights, they are human rights too. Now, their whole history is a history of struggles. Struggle to assert their rights over their land, resources, and community. So beginning from the mid-18th century up to now, innumerable martyrs have laid down their life in standing up for the right over the land, that even forced the colonial power to enact some laws like the CNT, SPT Acts in Jharkhand to protect the land of the Adivasis from being alienated. Now, in more recent times, growing awareness is leading to significant people's protests and struggles and movements. To mention a few, Netherhart, Coel Karo, against ArcelorMittal, against Panam Company, Nagari. These are some significant struggles carried on by people. They have succeeded in some, failed in others, partially succeeded in others, but a people who continue their struggle. Friends, finally, to conclude, when the powers that be deny the tribal people their constitutional, legal, judicial rights, it is denying them their rights as tribals. And since tribals are human beings par excellence, it is denying them their human rights. So this is the final statement that I wish to make, and I wish to thank all of you for your kind attention and listening.
Thank you, Stan. We will now move on to the questions that have been raised by the participants. We have told participants, and I'm reminding you, questions can be asked in Hindi, in Tamil, and in English, but they will be answered in English. Matthew, with the questions.
Thank you, Father Stan. Thank you, Henry. Just a few questions from my end, like which I've gathered from people. Maybe 3 I will present now. Later, the other questions can be answered later. The first question is, as a rights activist, should I use a terminology indigenous or tribal? I want to understand the social and legal difference between the both. Second question, can there be 5th schedule implemented in areas where, of course, the scheduled tribes are in majority, but also has significant population of scheduled caste, other backward classes, and general category? And a couple of participants have asked with regard to the modern development and the indigenous way of living and the conflict between the both.
See, first to answer your question very broadly, there are different terms used about the Adivasi people. In fact, you might have noticed that I did not use the word tribal in my presentation, because tribal is a word that the British colonial rulers introduced that was meant to divide our Indian society and to categorize the Indian society. There are other words that are terms that are being used in different parts of the world. The United Nations has consistently used the word indigenous. That is, people who have been there from the beginning, who belong to that land. In other places, in Africa, no one speaks of indigenous people. They are all Africanos. In the Americas, they are called natives. In Australia and New Zealand, they are called aboriginals. But here in India, we feel that the word Adivasi is better expressive of the reality. Adi, that means the beginning, origin, Vasi, meaning inhabitant. So this is the certain difference in the use of the words, but it means the same people, wherever they are. The second question, can you just repeat it to me, please? I didn't get it.
Yes,
Matthew?
yes, I'm repeating it. A participant asked with regard to the 5th schedule areas, and participant.
Matthew,
You see, scheduling has been done in the Constitution, the formation of the Constitution. On what basis this was done, that's a complicated thing we will not enter into. So the thing is, who has the right to schedule a people? Is it the ruling class to schedule a people? You call someone scheduled tribe, you call someone else scheduled caste, you call someone else forward caste. So this scheduling is a term that's been introduced in the Constitution. So it is being used that way, especially by the government. So let it use it that way, but let us use the word that makes sense to us. That's where we use the word Adivasi.
Matthew, third question. Matthew, the third question, please.
Yeah, I'm just taking it out. Yeah, the third question was with regard to the conflict between given the modernization, the industrialization, etc., and the whole thing with regard to the indigenous identity. So, question of identity, culture, in conflict with modern development, etc.
You see, the values that I spelled out that characterize the Adivasi people, they all stand in contravention to the capitalist values. Like, say, equality. Equality is not a value in a capitalist society. Or cooperation is not a value. Rather, competition is the value. One who succeeds in the competition is the one who will come up in life. Again, with regard to, say, our decision-making process, we believe that representative democracy is the best form of democracy, whereas a participative democracy as practiced by tradition among the Adivasis, that is much more expressive of people and their participation in any decision-making process. So the value systems stand opposed to each other, and there is no way by which you can reconcile the two. Rather, it is time now that the capitalist values are betraying their own internal contradictions, and people are beginning to recognize and acknowledge the value of the Adivasi values. So I think you and I need to stand by these values of equality, of fraternity, cooperation, consensus decision making. That's the call to all of us.
Henry, I have one more question. Maybe the last question for the stand. So a participant asks, has the state of Jharkhand, which is primarily a tribal state, fared better in upholding the rights of the Adivasis?
They are not opposing the right of?
No. He is
I'll repeat. Has the state of Jharkhand, which is primarily a tribal state,
Yes.
has it fared better to other states in upholding the right of Adivasis?
Well, it all depends on the ruling class and the government that takes control. Till last year, we were very much under very trying circumstances under the previous government. Now the present government, which is led by a predominant Adivasi party, JMM, Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, and led by a young Adivasi leader, it gives us some hope that things can revert back to more humane functioning of society, recognizing the rights of people, especially the Adivasi people. So we are subject to the political climate that is there. But still, the struggle has to go on. One has to stand up for truth and justice, cost what may. And in fact, several activists are paying the price for their action, for standing up for truth and justice. So our work has to carry on this line, regardless of whether the political climate is very favorable or not so favorable to us.
Thank you, Father Stan. Henry, over to you.
Father Stan,
Yes.
I have never asked any panelist a question. And I'm taking the freedom today to ask you a question.
Yes, please.
The first time I've done it in this course. You had visitors from Pune to your humble room in the year 2018. They visited your room and took away some treasures of your life, particularly the Tamil songs in your CDs. They came back again in June 2019, once again,
Hmm.
By the time you had to leave for your annual leave and then medical, um, your medical treatments, etc.,
Yes.
you came back only after the elections are over.
Hmm.
What is this mystery of these visitors and the reason for you having to come back only after the elections were over?
Well, you see, the two rates in my living and working premise was done because of an action I had taken on behalf of the under trial prisoners who are languishing in the jails of Jharkhand. I had filed a case in Jharkhand High Court, and the High Court, even in the process of admitting my petition, ordered the government to give all the information needed about all the under trial prisoners. Now it is more than 2 years, and the government is still to provide all the information that we have asked for. And we kept pressing on the government, where is the information? Give us the full data. So this was the thing that irked the Jharkhand government at that time. So I was very much on the way with regard to the way they wanted to function, and they wanted to put me out of the way. So now I have come to know that the SP of Kunti district and the SP of Pune, they were very much in touch with each other about me, feeding information to each other. So the two cases, both of Bhima Koregaon as well as the Patalgadi case, was done to put me out of the way. So with regard to my coming south during this crucial time, I had not planned because of this. I did not leave the place because of this, but I had planned even before. Every 3 or 4 years, I come south to meet my friends, my folks, and to attend some health needs. So as per that, I had come south. But the government soon declared, not the government, the police, Kunti police declared me an absconder. And soon after, they came again and raided my place, took away whatever little was left in my room. But the fact is, I was not absconding. I had submitted a affidavit in Jharkhand High Court that I am in so-and-so place, ISI, Indian Social Institute, Bangalore. I am attending to certain needs and meeting people, especially the migrant people in the 3 states, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka. So I was not in hiding, which the police made to look that I was in hiding and absconding. So then I challenged it in the Jharkhand High Court, the procedure that the police followed in declaring, first issuing arrest warrant, then proclamation of arrest, absconder, and third, a raid of the room.
Yeah.
So in December, 6th of December last year, the Jharkhand High Court held that the action of the police was illegal. It did not follow the procedure prescribed by the Code of Criminal Law. But still, it allowed the police to continue its investigation on me and to act legally as per the criminal code and act on me. So that's where I am.
Thank you
So
for the
it's
stand.
still there.
Thank you for the stand.
Yes.
I think this is the best message that an 83-year-old peaceful Jesuit who works among the Adivasis can convey to everybody here. The work with the poorest of the poor has a price to be paid. And here is a young gentleman teaching us how we have to be ready at any time to pay the price. I remember asking Stan the day the Bhimo Koregaon case, police had come to his room. And I said, what did you lose? He said, what do I have? They took away my computer. They took away my recorder. They took away my mobile phone. But more precious, they took away my songs. Enna paatu, enna Rahman?
A.R. Rahman.
A.R. Rahman பாட்டை எடுத்துட்டு போயிட்டாங்க. I say it in Tamil because he told it to me in Tamil. Ilayaraja's songs and A.R. Rahman songs, which I used to listen to every day, they took that off. That is what they could get. But they came back again. And then they came back again in the Patalgudi case. Friends, Google Bhimo Koregaon case. Google Patalgudi case. Very serious cases. The serious price that Stan had to pay. But he has come back and he's there once again working with the government, with the people to ensure that things change. We are proud, Stan, you are with us. I'm sure this sharing, and you're correcting our title, not tribal rights, Henry, it is indigenous rights, indigenous people's rights or Adivasi people's rights. Yes, lots of corrections are being brought into what we are doing in the course, and I'm so happy that people are participating with views. Thank you very much, Stan, on behalf of all the organizers for accepting this invitation. Nandini Sundar was supposed to be here from the Delhi University. Her father was rushed to hospital. She was very disturbed that she could not be here. But I knew that there is somebody I can take recourse to. So I took recourse to my mentor for the Stan, and he agreed to come. And we are extremely happy, Stan, that you are with us today. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Solomon, who was behind the scene assisting. I think you need to show your face here. People need to know who you are for something else. Solomon works with a collective in Jharkhand, a collective that works with the migrant labor who have moved from Jharkhand to Tamil Nadu. And because of that, Solomon was able to convey to us the plight of 14 migrant laborers working with the borewell industry in Tamil Nadu. The Jesuits in the IDS Center in Madurai collaborated. Their lawyer immediately was set in place and rescued the 14 of them as forced labor, bonded labor. I'm using these terminologies because you have to be now accustomed to terminologies. They are bonded laborers. They are forced labor because they were never paid their salary, not during Corona period, even earlier. They were rescued. They are presently there. I met them yesterday in Ideas, fed for and looked after by 2 Adivasi nuns who are from Santal community in Jharkhand. Amazing. So that's the beautiful work these people do.
Yes.
And thanks to Henry and all the team at People's Watch over there in Madurai for all the help that you have rendered. It was really ideas, but also People's Watch.
It's important for our participants to understand that this is solidarity.
Yes.
Solidarity runs across states. It's run across ages. And the solidarity enters the lives of many people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very
Thanks a lot.
happy to have been with you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Friends, without losing time, let me welcome my younger brother, Mayank Sinha, relaxed as he is, waiting for this course. I said, this is the youngest resource person we will be having, but the most relaxed because this is his work of communicating to people through all these media that we find difficult these days. Mayank is a student of the Tata Institute of Social Science. I'm sure his professor is right there, Parivalan, trying to see what the student is going to say. A student of graduate studies in rural development of TIS in Mumbai, and thereafter who did his master's in the social work department. And then you remember when Professor Parivalan spoke to us a few days ago, he listed a series of engagements of the academic institution into the community. And this is very important for academic institutions. And Mayank was the founder and project manager. He's the founder and project manager of what they call TANDA, TANDA, which is the Field Action Project of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And he works dedicatedly today with the denotified tribes. He has a life committed now to the cause of the denotified tribes across the country, and works in the state of Maharashtra, Delhi, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Bihar, West Bengal. He left Tamil Nadu. I don't know why he left Tamil Nadu, because he collaborates very much with our Kallotter community in the south of Tamil Nadu. And therefore, he works on their educational issues, on their health, livelihood, legal aid, advocacy, and networking issues, and collaborates with a variety of organizations, but all focused towards research projects and other projects on the denotified tribes. Over to you, Mayank. Mayank will communicate to you for the next 30 minutes. All the best. Thank you for being with us, because we all believe that denotified tribes also have human rights.
Hi, Henry. Thanks a lot. Am I audible, Rajvel?
Yes, Mayank, you are audible.
Yeah, thank you. I will just take around 20 minutes to finish my presentation. And whatever I'm speaking is mostly based on the work that I have been doing from last almost 10 years. So to begin is today is 16th May. And the 16th May is marked as a Romanian Resistance Day. What we also, like the Roma, also known as the Gypsies. And why they celebrate 16th May is because 600 Roma who was in the Nazi camp has registered against the Nazi officers in 1944. However, 2nd August in 1944, 3,000 of Roma have been killed in gas chamber in Bile camp. Similarly, the denotified tribe also celebrate their Independence Day not on 15 August, but on 31st August. And we need to understand why they don't consider the independence, or they celebrate the independence of free India on 15 August. To understand this, we have to go a little bit into the history to understand who are these communities who face the immense discrimination not only in India, but also most of the part of the Europe. The DNT, denotified tribe, is a very vague terminology, mostly coming from a legal terminology. Because in 1971, there was an act, it's a criminal tribal act, which denotified which was actually repealed in 1952. Therefore, all the communities which are listed under the CTA Act has been denotified. That's why we call as a denotified communities. Now, about these communities, they are like very diverse in terms of language, culture, practices, by profession. And if you see by professional category, they can be divided into 5 subcategories. The number 1 is a street entertainers. Like, for example, if you may remember in your childhood days, a snake charmer used to come in our city or even most of the part of the village, who shows a snake and play games with the snake. Also, there is a community known as a Darveshi community, which performed animals like which perform with animals like monkey or bear. Then there is another community what we also known as a Kalandar or Jadugar. They perform magicians. Then there is another community known as a Bhat, who play Kathakali. And similarly, there is a musicians community like Nat or Bajania, who play a street music and beg from house to house. There's another subcategory is a hunter-gatherer community. For example, Pardi of Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh or Maharashtra, or Sabar of Orissa, Jharkhand, and West Bengal, which categorized as a hunter-gatherers group. The third category is pastoral community, like for example, Purba from Karnataka, which travels from their ships. Similarly, one Gujar who travels with their buffaloes in the Himalayan range. The next is a good and services. For example, Vadar, Wood, Garia Lohar. These are the communities who, like for example, Oud is artisans community uh, who make all the construction related work, and they have a very good knowledge of the stones. Similarly, Banjara is into the transport and the salt businesses. Gadia Lohar is another community who are blacksmith. And the last one is a religious communities like Fakir and the Gosavi. And most of the religious communities in the Nath sect are from the nomadic tribe. Now, once you have read their occupations, I don't believe any of you must have think that why these communities must have notified as under the Criminal Tribal Act. However, these are the photos which you can see on the screen has been taken from a library from UK. The library is run by Salvation Army, and they were in India during early 1900. And these pictures are from the nomadic group, except the last one, which is from one Gujar community. Next. Now, before we go further, we need to understand what is the difference between a nomadic tribe and denotified tribe. The nomadic tribe is not limited to India, it is found all over the world. It is not just limited to an Indian phenomenon. They unfortunately didn't fit to both the category, that is a caste or the tribe. They have their own civilization, own values, own way and the custom. However, there is another category within the nomadic tribe, which is known as a semi-nomadic tribe, which lives in close association with caste system or near to the villages. Mostly the religious performer or the pastoral communities are classified under semi-nomadic group. However, nomadic tribe integration with the settled community is limited to economic interaction only. They don't interact with the settled society beyond economic term. On the other hand, if you see denotified tribe, they are actually a social legal entity constitute mostly of nomadic tribe. Just in the case of Tamil Nadu, there is a lot of complication because most of the castes who revolted against a local landlord or the British, they notify them under the Criminal Tribal Act. Now, DNT, as I said earlier, it's come from a Criminal Tribal Act of 1871, which abolished in 1952 and is replaced by Habitual Offender Act. So under 1871, all the community which has been notified has been de-notified in 1952. Therefore, the term is DNT. And DNT constitutes of around 200 communities across India. However, the nomadic community constitutes of around 800 community across India. And roughly their population is around 10% of Indian population, which is very huge in number. So we are talking about around 10 crore of population. Next. Now to understand the concept of 1871, I have just used one slide. There is a criminologist, a very famous criminologist known as Lombroso, who used the theory of anthropological criminology, and it's coined the term born criminals. And this is from here the British and all the policy makers during the colonial time have picked this term, and they use extensively in India and also in Europe, because in Europe they are also facing the similar issue with the Romas or Gypsies. And Roma or Gypsies are the Indian origin tribe, nomadic tribe, who traveled, I think, 566 years way back. There is no documentation to show why they traveled, but they also face a similar kind of people when they start ruling India. And their understanding of the Indian caste system, whatever they studied, is that the profession is embedded in the caste institution. Therefore, they understood that if a community is into the crime, it means that her father, son, and even the grandfather and then son, everybody is going to be a crime, because it's in India the caste system is worked like that. Therefore, while introducing a criminal tribal act in 1871, the lieutenant governor has very specifically said that these five traditional occupation is crime. Next. Now the British has a very strong argument when they put the law of Criminal Tribal Act of 1871. One, they say that the stigma of criminality already exists in India, and they are, and it's not that it's not completely false. For example, Meena Radhakrishnan, on her research in Yadukula tribe in Tamil Nadu, noted that there are already a perceived notion about nomadic tribe in most of the people of Tamil Nadu. At that time, it is known as the Madras Presidency. For example, they are lazy, they move randomly, the women are morally corrupt. So these are the issue they already have. Like most of the people across India have thought and have a perceived notion about these nomadic tribes. Second, there's a story across, particularly in the North India, there's a community known as Thugis. Now, who are Thugis and what they are Thugis, there's no documentary evidence, but Thugis has been a problem for the British administration. Therefore, in 1836, they have set up the Thuggi and Dacoity Suppression Act, and it ran from 1836 to 1848, and it used to kill many Thuggi people from a particular communities. Also, before the Criminal Tribal Act came into the existence, there's a four communities of Eastern UP and Central India, that is the Madhya Pradesh, Sonaria, Bavaria, Ahiria, and Harbua, which are under the surveillance, and they are being charged of many criminals acts. However, things actually turned very ugly when the revolt happened in 1857. Among the nomadic tribe, there are many warrior tribes who are nomadic in their nature. They participated with their local kingdom against the British. And these are the well documented by historians and also by the British government. And British found an opportunity to suppress this whole revolt by notifying them under the Criminal Tribal Act. Next. These are the photo of Dacoit that has been killed and arrested. And to us right, there's a one man standing. He's known as a Sultana Daku. So Sultana Daku, particularly in Bihar and eastern part of the UP, considered as a folk hero who used to take money from the British and Dacoit. I mean, usually he used to Dacoit all the train and I mean, all the wealth from the British and used to distribute within the poor. So he used to consider the local Robin Hood. However, he was hanged by the British administration. And these are the equipment that has been kept in by Salvation Army. And unfortunately, even now, these things have been taught both at the National and State Police Academy. Next. Now, I'll just give you a brief idea what is the provision of Criminal Tribe Act. So, Criminal Tribe Act is not a central act. So, it's up to the province to notify the community under the Criminal Tribal Act. For example, if one community is notified a Criminal Tribal Act, it doesn't mean the central province, that community is also come under the CT Act. So it is a localized act. Second, it has been amendment from time to time and different section has been introduced. Once you are notified as a Criminal Tribal Act, it means that you are a born criminal. Even a baby who is a 1 year, 1 day old, she or he is also a criminal under this act. So this act doesn't imply to a person, it implies to the whole community. So if in the Madras presidency or the central presidency or Mumbai presidency, for example, if a Pardi notify as under the Criminal Tribal Act, means whole Pardi community is notified under the Criminal Tribal Act. They have to give attendance at least 3 times in a day to the nearest police station and explain them where they are in the last 4 to 5 hours. Apart from that, they have to give a record of all the belongings they have to the local village head. And also there, like these communities, people can take them to the custody without any legal work. They don't have to follow any proceeding. They have to don't provide anything. They can be picked up anytime and can be questioned in police station. Next. Next, Rajul. Now we have to understand. This is the yeah. We have to understand what are the issues they want to address to the Criminal Tribal Act. The number one, what they said is that we are rehabilitating the criminals of India, and for rehabilitation we need an act which can control these people under the British. The second, which the other studies suggested, is that what the British did in Australia and Canada, through this act they able to get a very cheap labor, because once you are notified, you are always under the surveillance. And what the British has also amendment in one of the, I think in 1911 in Criminal Tribal Act, they introduced settlements colony. So under the settlements colony, all the community being brought in the settlements colony, and from settlements colony, labor has been provided for the construction of road, construction of railway, and other things. So it's also the issue of the cheap labor. Second is that it's easy to control if there is a proper record has been maintained and the surveillance is on where are these communities have been moving. The third is about the tax. The British government came here for earn money, unlike the previous ruler, for example, even the Mughal or earlier ruler, they came here, they settled here. But the British has very clear agenda. They came here to exploit the resources, and one of the earning is from the tax. Like to tax these people is almost impossible because they are the wondrous community. They migrate, and it's easy to tax the people who are settled. So therefore, they are not able to pay a tax. To treat them as an equal citizen, British have no interest. Therefore, they converted into a skillful labor. So therefore, if you see our Next slide. So if you see the next slide, this is a settlements colony that have been function across India, mostly by a Christian organization, but one of the dominant organization who get almost 90% of share in running the settlement colony is the Salvation Army. So these are the photographs taken from the Salvation Army. In Salvation Army, these communities has been provided mostly a skill development training what when the present government department is doing, so that they must not, I mean, these people should not be engaged in the crime. They have a set of skill we can help them to earn a dignity life. So Bhut Tagar, who is a founder of the Salvation Army, he used to run 10 different types of settlements colony. One is agriculture, is agro, industrial. So you can read the slide, but I want to mention one important thing, particularly the Yedukula tribe of Tamil Nadu. So when the Yedukula tribe is notified under the Criminal Tribal Act, they also being bound in the settlement camp. So there is a company which all know is known as an Indian Leaf Tobacco Company, which later popularly known as the ITC. So ITC and the Salvation Army came into the contract where the Salvation Army start providing the cheap laborers to the ITC company, and it helps both. It helps the Salvation Army to sustain themselves, and also the tobacco company to hire a cheap labor from the Salvation Army. So it is one of the example where this community started being exploited. Even the Yerukula tribe has been taken by the British from the Madras Presidency to Assam for the tea gardening. Next. So these are the photo of the different settlements colony where where they have been trained and engaged in the different occupations. Next. Now it's not that our Indian government didn't did anything. They are very sensitive. So there are various commissions they have set up to address the issue. So one is the Angus Committee Inquiry Report, which set up in 1952, which declared that the Criminal Tribal Act is an inhuman act. Therefore, it recommended for the repeal of the act. The act is repealed in 1952, but even in the Anger Committee, he noted that these committee members have the criminal behavior and it's important to control them. Therefore, he suggested for the Habitual Offender Act. Habitual Offender Act is a copy paste of Criminal Tribal Act. The only difference is that Habitual Offender Act notify an individual and Criminal Tribal Act notify the community. The next is Kaka Saheb Kalekar Commission, which is a very important commission set up to understand what are the communities who can be included in the scheduled caste and scheduled caste tribe. Unfortunately, it also noted about these communities, but not able to recommend anything. Local community is very important because local community has given a suggestion, which I think is very interesting. He said that these communities should be taken out from the list of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe and treated exclusively as a distinctive group with a development scheme specially designed to suit their dominant characteristics. Friends, understand the center point is that the scheduled caste, which mostly consists of untouchable caste, their issues of deprivation is come from the caste institution and untouchability. Similarly, tribals have their own issues, minority has their own issue, and women has their own issues. Therefore, they are demanding the reservation or law or protective or preventive law for their development based on their history of discrimination, which is very different from each another. Now, if the nomadic tribe is included in the scheduled caste, where the nomadic tribe has a history of discrimination not by untouchability but the stigma of criminality, whereas the scheduled caste, the center point is untouchability and caste system. You cannot have a same program for both of the communities. You have to have a different program because their suffering is different and their issues are completely different. So that's what Lokur Commission has indicated. But unfortunately, it didn't, I mean, Government of India didn't address this issue. Later, as we know, there's a very famous BP Mandal Commission, 1978. It also didn't address the issue of denotified or nomadic tribe. However, they annexed one report, especially for nomadic and denotified communities. The next is the Renke Commission, which is set up in 2006. I think in independent India, it is the first commission which has specifically for nomadic and denotified tribe. I think the summary of the Renke Commission has been shared with you by Rajvel. I will just give you few important points. On the line of Lokur community, the Renke Commission also suggested for the third schedule. And he said that let's take it out community from the OBC, SC, ST, and form a third category, which is called as a third schedule. This will help them to have a political representation in the parliament. Also, program and the scheme can be designed according to their need and requirement. Second, Renke Commission is instrumental in bringing out very clear with the clarity is that stigma and criminality is attached with them and it is the center of their problem. The commission also pointed out for the first time that their population consists of 10% of Indian population. Another commission had also says that these communities is in conflict with law. Now, for example, Habitual Offender Act, these communities don't want, because in Habitual Offender Act, unfortunately, our police department or the criminal justice institution are not sensitive enough to our origin or indigenous people, and they carry their own own Brahminical thought process of understanding the other communities. So they are the easy target, and the Habitual Offender Act is still one of the tools. Second, surprisingly, if you read the Prevention of Beggary Act, it says that if you perform on the street, you are considered as a beggar. Most of the nomadic tribe who sing the folk song or who are into the street entertainment, they perform on the street. And if you perform, and if they perform, they can be arrested in the Begging Act. The next is the Prevention of Cruelty to Animal Act. Like all these community whose livelihood is dependent upon, for example, snake or monkeys or deer, this act criminalized them. And the act didn't address their issue at all. There is no provision made under the act to rehabilitate them. Similarly, the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 and the Forest Act of 1980 and so on, they also criminalize this community because most of this community, they're dependent upon forest resources too. The commission also says that there is a lack of data and we need to study. However, post the commission, few state government do form DNP board with no money at all, and they not able to function very properly. The next we have is the IDATE commission. This is the second commission which constituted in 2015. The IDATE didn't give anything etc. IDATE do ask for a permanent commission, and IDATE commission listed more nomadic community into their list. However, IDATE commission contribution is is not something great. Next. So here are the two commission chairperson, Irate and Rinke. Now the problem with the independent India that these committees is facing, as I told earlier, is their problem is of the stigma. Now I will give you an example. Like we work with the NUT committee in Bihar. The NUT committee is traditionally where into the music and art. With the time, the medium of entertainment changed, and slowly for their survival, they started moving into a sex industry. Now, most of the NUT committee are into the intergeneration sex committee or into adult dancing or what's run in mostly in Mumbai, the bar dance. Most of the committee go there. Now, if they want to study in a school, they face a discrimination. As a result, in Hor Araria district, one of the districts in Bihar, there is 2 graduates till now who completed their BA, because whenever they school they used to face discrimination, they drop out. Even the teacher and the young boy from the school used to pass a comment on a girl because they know which community they are and what profession they do. Second, if you talk about the criminalization, this is the cycle of criminalization. Now there's a two way to understand this. So one is that anything which is against this law of the land, it is a crime, and you can be punished according to all the CRPC and other things you have. Now the problem is that until unless these communities don't break the law, they cannot survive. For example, if there is a prevention of cruelty to animals, if I don't break the law, I cannot earn the livelihood because I don't have any other skill set which can provide me the livelihood. Similarly, there is a lot of examples. For example, Sasi or the Kanjar who sell liquor. Now, selling a liquor or brewing a liquor is illegal, particularly the local liquor. You need a license. But the problem is that from the community which I am, if I ask for a job, even though if I'm a qualified person, the company or employee doesn't give me a job because they usually want to know what caste you belong and what is your address. For example, in Ahmedabad, Chhara Nagar, there is a tribe known as a Chhara. It is a subgroup of Sasi tribe. In Ahmedabad, their main livelihood earning is from selling liquor. And also this community known for petty crimes. And 100% literacy is there in Charanagar. Most of the youth have the BA or the master degree, but none of them able to get an employment because whenever they show the address Charanagar, the employee usually don't give them job because the stigma of criminality they carry. The second, the problem they face is the atrocity. Now, if you have read the summary of Zenke Commission, most of the people and the families doesn't have the access to land, doesn't have access to entitlements like ration card, election card, bank account, etc. Now, if they goes to any village and usually if the village allow them, they settle for 1 year, 2 years, and after 2 years they move. Like for example, I went to narrate a case of a Ghatkopar of Mumbai when I was studying the Pardi tribe in Mumbai and try to understand why they had left their village. So one of the reasons they say is that due to the atrocity, the villagers attack because someone is murdered and the community thought that we have done some some upper caste people, something is stolen and the family thought that we have done. They didn't went to the police station. They just attacked them, and it's a very frequent, and most of them is unreported. That's why they flew to Mumbai and start living on the street. There's a one famous case of Madhya Pradesh where the MLA from the BJP party and the municipal corporation from the other party, I don't think it's from the BJP, but all the stakeholders are involved in removing the Pardi settlement from the Betwa district from Madhya Pradesh. They rape women and there are around 60 households. Everything has been displaced by them. That case is still on. The police case, the problem with the police administration is that the training which they have received, God knows how old they are. Because recently I went to one of the police academy to give a lecture on denotified tribes. They said that in our examination, there is a question about born criminals, and to pass that we have to write who are the born criminals and what are the born criminals in Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu and etc. What is their mode of operandi and how to investigate them. Like these things they have to write. Now even the police system need to be reformed. Unfortunately, it is not. As the result, if you see, like for example, Bundel has a gang rape case which happened 2 years back in UP. After the rape, there's a lot of media cry, and they pick up few person from a Bavaria tribe. Now the Bavaria tribe is also a denotified tribe, and they are the easy targeted. They picked up, and it is published in the newspaper that they are the tribe who has a history, and also the British colony, they have a history. They must have done it, and that's how the case was shut down. Similarly, you can find cases across, like for example, I think the just before the corona and before the Delhi riots, there is a rape of a lady doctor near Hyderabad, and the 4 people have been encountered by Andhra Pradesh police, and they have made a hero. The police officer had made the hero. Now, no one has actually went and explored further whom he do the encounter, from which committee they belong. They all are from the DNT committees, and police knows them. At least DNT committee in India, police knows them. It doesn't matter the prime minister, home minister knows. Police knows them, and from time to time there are several cases where they have been used to shut a case. I remember one case. I think it is investigated by People's Watch, where it is I think Andhra and Karnataka border case where people from the Vadar community has been encountered. So there are many examples of that. The second point is just just go before slide. I haven't completed. Yeah, the landless I have covered, livelihood I have covered. And yeah, the last point I want to say is about the media narrative. Like if you type even now on the Google, just type Bachra, Bachara, and click, type in a Google and click in the news. All the things that will come is talk about the crime or the sex crime. And I have noted that if like the media houses mention their caste, the problem is that if you mention the caste, it it, it, it actually build a perception among the readers that community from this caste are into the crimes. I have never seen a media report which says that a Brahmin committed a dakati, a Marwari from Gujarat has stolen 6,000 crores of Indian banks and flew to some foreign country. In that cases, you will not see any caste. But when the DNT commit a crime or when the police arrest them for any crime, you should mention the name of a person. maximum. Why you're mentioning a caste? Because if you mention a caste, the whole community again being targeted. Next.
Getting time.
Yeah, just to conclude, what we actually demanding the whole DNT movement. The first is that to recognize us in all states and notify us that we exist as an anti-DNT community. Second, we demand a separate census so that people knows the numbers and it helps the policymaker to design the program for us. Third is permanent commission. The last one is categorize us into a one category, not in the SC, ST or third schedule or OBC. Either put under the SC, ST or third schedule because it will be easy for us. And the conclude is that I think for the DNT communities, and particularly in the frame of the human rights, three things is important. One is the freedom from suspicion, another is the freedom from stigma and criminality, and the third one is freedom of mobility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayank. It's mind-boggling. What? Okay, you got something from the National Alliance Group. The first Norm Film Festival. Yes.
Yeah, and yeah, this is one
Very
of the
good, very
activity
good,
that
very
we
good.
do.
Since
It's an film festival
it is
for
5:30
creating
and we try
awareness.
to
That's
maintain time, Mayank, I'm leaving the questions to be raised privately with you, which we kindly request you to respond, and then we will get the answers back to the participants. I was trying to signal so that we will. I'm sure there have been very interesting questions people had, but from morning we have been looking at communities that were excluded, my dear friends. We looked at, from morning we were looking at the Dalits, we went into the persons engaged in manual scavenging, we went to the Adivasi peoples, and now we are with the DNT. It is on the issue of exclusion. And we have been able to see that in all these communities from morning, the violations of Article 21. And Mayank repeats, and Mayank did not repeat so hard because of the time deficit he had, but that most of these members of these communities are booked in all the false cases that you have, which the police are not able to investigate. And that is why in Hyderabad, many of us here, I'm sure many of you here, many of you in your classrooms, many of you in your private gatherings, hailed the police in Hyderabad for the killing of those 4 people. Encounter killing that took place there, the famous encounter. And now Mayank says they're all DNT members. And if it's a DNT member, take it from me, they are definitely not involved in the killing. I do day in and day out. People's Watch does in day in and day out our cases. We have one friend here, Nagendran, who does complete all cases of the colored community who belong to the DNT tribe here. And we know that all their cases are false cases. We are able to prove that they are false cases after a long trial of several years, after all their resources have been lavished, and they have to start life once again, only because they have been identified by the police, and the police can always be able to use them in all the undetected cases they have. That is a sad community with which Mayank has decided to dedicate his life to. We all stand in solidarity with you, Mayank, at this time. You have opened our eyes to a community of people we normally never have access to. And to the many social worker students who are here, here is your topic for your PhDs. This is your topic for your PhDs. This is what Mayank has done, opening our eyes from to the reality ahead of us. Thank you very much, Mayank, for being with us today. Thank you, friends. I know I've crossed time, and therefore I will close early. Wish you all are able to go to your facilitators group, do your evaluation, then come to the end of the day. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.